Welcome to Step Up, the radio podcast that helps voices everywhere in the business world make the world a better place. Today, we're interviewing David Wolf, and he certainly helps people's voices be heard. His business is podcast and radio, and you can find him at podcastonradio.com. He is one of my very favorites. He started as a music producer, and even before then, as a little kid, he always had a microphone and was interviewing people. So he's come back to his true self. And talk about stepping up. He has his own syndicated radio show for entrepreneurs and thought leaders all around the world. Well, welcome, David Wolf.
Thank you, Dr. Gurri. How are you?
I am splendid, sir. Especially anytime I talk to you, it's always a hoot.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm getting ready to talk with a bunch of speakers, and it occurred to me, who better to ask for some advice? So we have people who are doing podcasts, who are doing presentations, who are doing videos. And one of the questions that always swirls around is, in our efforts to brand, how do we know what are the ethical ways to get images and sounds that aren't ours?
That's a great question. And it comes up certainly in the line of work that we do. So on the audio side, much of what we do is produce what I'll call show liners. In a podcast, you have the intro and you have the outro, as we sometimes call it. And even sometimes some little transitional musical pieces that go on the inside of this 20, 30, 1 hour podcast. And this is probably true for video as well as audio. So the question becomes is, where do you get the music for it? And this is generally something that I'm tasked with finding. In some rare occasions, as was the case with you and your programming, you already had purchased the rights to a theme music that we now use to cut intros to use as bumpers, to play in, to play out, intros, outros, etc. So you came to me as my client, Dr. Gurri, with that already in the mix, and there was no concern about it because you had paid for it. But for those that are starting either with me or anyone, or that they're producing their own work on their own, the question becomes is, how do you get this material? So there are a couple answers to this. One is there is a lot of free stuff out there. If you go to YouTube, you can literally find free music textures. You can find grooves. You can find beats. You can find stuff that works really quite well for an intro or an outro. And we'll talk about them. So
if I go to youtube.com, where do I find this wonderful free stuff? Simply
search in the little search window at the top of YouTube. Search for free music for podcasting or free music tracks or anything where it says free music. Those search terms, those keywords should bring you into it. And if anybody has trouble finding it, they can send me an email at smallbizamerica@gmail.com and I'll help guide them through it. Okay, but that's the way to do that. And so there's a lot of royalty-free music available right on YouTube, and that's the first go-to place. I think there are others as well, but that's the one that I tend to use most, and it's the one I'm most familiar with. And now, interestingly, I used to, as you mentioned, I was a music producer, so I own a lot of my own music library. So for a lot of my clients, I have somewhat of a broad range of selections to choose from. This is music I own that I can put into my own clients' programming. So that solves the problem for me. Now, in some cases, whatever I happen to have in my library may not be an appropriate track for them. And this is something I usually collaborate with my clients on. My clients are business owners, they're thought leaders, they're content generators, and they may have a very strong idea about the mood, the context they want to project in their show. Some may say, I don't want music at all. I have a funny story. The guy that got me into the music business was one of the famous jingle writers in Chicago. His name was Dick Marks. He passed away in 1999. Incidentally, he's the father of Richard Marx, the pop star. And Dick once told me a story about a client who came into him, and he was in the business of writing music. So the client comes in and says, hey, Dick, we've got this TV commercial. We need some music for it. And he looked at the film and he said, you know what? I don't think music is going to help this messaging. I don't think music is going to add any value to this piece of film. I think you should roll it without music. And so he made a recommendation to his client not to use music. And this is a guy that was in the business of composing and producing original music for radio, TV, and film, as I eventually got into. I spun a company off from that experience. So in some cases, music is not even an option and shouldn't be considered. It just depends on the content. So this is a dialogue I have with my client before we get into it. When there is music, though, so you can go to my library, you can go out to YouTube and choose your own. You can also go out to music libraries that charge. Usually it's in the range of $10 to $50, depending on the length of the track that you choose. And you can literally search by genre. You can search by it's country and western, it's information newsy, it's romantic, it's solo flamenco guitar, Latin. You can find jazz. You can pretty much find any genre of music and buy a library music cut for an incremental amount. As I mentioned, about $20, $25, $30 is a good range for a 30-second cut, which will generally satisfy what you need for an intro and an outro for a show. It's a long-winded answer, but I kind of wanted to cover the gamut of what's out there in terms of music choices.
I thought it was a very great answer. So the question is, how do we buy it? So where do I go? What websites do I go to? And if I'm buying it, am I buying it for one use or for all time?
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Since I don't have them all at the top of my head, there's this library I wrote myself for called GNP Music, GMP, Golf Mike Papa Music. They're out of the Midwest. Great little company. There are several others. Sound Ideas is another one. I think they're still called Sound Ideas. And there are probably a couple others. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a list on this podcast now.
Thank you. Great.
So that people can see the list. And then if they have more questions about these resources, I think what I'm going to do is create a blog around this. I think that'd be a great resource. And I'll do that on podcastandradio.com.
I think that all of your stuff should be on your podcastandradio.com so that everyone can go there.
All
and
right.
For those of us who don't want to do the searching, we can just, like what I did for one of my podcasts, say, hey, David, what do you think about this? And you just made it happen for me and far exceeded any expectation or wish I had ever had. So grateful to that. In terms of then the music credits, if I'm using a music for an intro and outro, how do I properly credit the originator of that music, even if it was free or even if I bought it?
So in the case of free, generally what I found from my experience of free use is that it will literally say free, no attribution required. And you'll see this in the YouTube stuff that I mentioned earlier in this session. In the case, all right, so a case came up a couple of times for me where the podcaster actually knew the band and got permission from the band to use it in their podcast. So in those cases, we did provide a verbal attribution at the end of the show. So you'd say, the outro would say something like, thank you for listening to Step Up with Dr. Margarita Gurri. Music was provided by XYZ. And so that way the band gets the attribution they're looking for. And again, that's a negotiable idea. I mean, you can go to a band and say, look, we'd like to use your music in a podcast, or I've been your fan. I've been coming to hear you at whatever club for years and years and years. I'd like to use this cut from your album. How do we do that? And the band may say, well, pay us some amount of money. They may say, pay us some money plus we'd like to get credit, or some combination of those elements. And so it can be very a negotiated event with the band or the owner of the copyright of the music. So that's the case where you know the artist. In the case where you don't know the artist, again, you'll either see no attribution required. If you buy it from a music library like GMP or Sound Ideas or some of the other music libraries that are available, it's not likely that you'll need to credit them because you're paying for the rights and it's not a part of the contract. And usually you asked, how do you buy it and how do you pay for it? Literally, either me, and I've done this for my clients, where I'll just go out, find a few music cuts, say, how do you like, which one do you like, A, B, or C? They like B, I play them a sample of it, then we go and complete the purchase. So you don't have to make a commitment before you actually decide that that's the one you want. With GMP, they have something called, they've got a clever name for it, where as an affiliate of them, I can actually go out to the music library and test drive a few cuts, so I don't have to pay for them, but I get a few seconds of a sample, and that way me and the client, my partner, my client, can decide which one fits best. So, but in those cases, no attribution is necessary for the most part. At least
that's pretty impressive. Well, how about all those photos and video images that you've put in my podcast. What do podcasters and videographers out there need to know about being ethical with those images?
All right, so good question. So I, again, will publish this in a blog on my website, podcastindradio.com. I'm newer to the video world than I am to the audio world, so I'll answer this more simply. There are image libraries out there that provide both, again, similar to music, analogous really. Shutterstock is the most obvious example and probably the most well-known. And you can literally do a Google search for images, and you'll find, if you search for free images, you'll be presented with two returns. One will be a bunch of stuff that's free that doesn't require any attribution and no payment whatsoever. Or you'll find images that have what's called a watermark in them, where it's like a stamp in the video, so you wouldn't use it because it just doesn't look good for your own product, your own finished product. And in those cases, you'll be directed to pay for the image. It might be a video, or you'll be presented, or you'll be presented with multiple resolutions of that video or image, so that you're buying what you need to produce your video in the highest quality way. Or if you don't need quite as high a quality, you'll be able to pay a lower price for that image. So there's a range of options, and you can pick from them. I'll publish a few options for you out there. Again, I wasn't prepared with a list of them, but I'll get them on the blog.
Thank you very much.
People that are watching this can go out there, and they can, if they want to DIY and kind of see what's out there before they deal with a producer like me or anyone else, they'll be equipped.
Well, I find it easier to just say, "Hey, David," and then have you take care of it.
Well, I love that. So please do that. Yeah.
The other thing I love is that when we finish stuff, we, like even this today, we'll talk, you'll do your magic, and then you post it on all the social media for me. So I love that. And so folks everywhere, if you're wanting to do it yourself, knock yourselves out. But I suggest that maybe even pay for some time with David to figure out what to do and how to do it more easily and more effectively, and certainly more professionally. David, do you have any last words for the ethics of what you do in terms of radio, podcast, and video?
Well, there's a lot of resources available out there in the webosphere. The internet has made it very, very, very easy to acquire the assets you need, whether it's images, video, or music, or soundtracks, or even sound effects to produce audio and video products. So if it's something you need a little bit more guidance around, I'm happy to help at any point. Again, the internet makes it very easy to DIY a lot of this stuff, but I'm always there for you. You can reach me at podcastindradio.com. There's a contact me form, and I'm here to help, and happy to do that.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, we're delighted. Thank you, David Wolf, for helping us step up with sharing our voices, whether it's with or without a video, and in an ethical way. So I want you to have a very, very nice day. Any last words, sir?
No, that's it. Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Gurri. It's a continually delight to work with you. All right, we'll see you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
For more information, visit redshoeinstitute.com.